turn this on, Gina.
Good afternoon, this is Dennis Fletcher, and it's Sunday afternoon, October 25th, and we're here with Hemet News talking to Malcolm Lilienthal, who's a candidate for District 3 of the Hemet City Council. And we're going to start off, Malcolm, by just ask you a little COVID-19 question. I notice we're 6 feet apart. Do you have any symptoms of COVID-19 yourself?
No, sir, I do not.
Well, I don't either, so do you feel comfortable if we pull our masks down?
I'm okay with that.
Okay, so we're just gonna doff our masks a little bit, and that'll help the audio quite a bit. But we are very concerned about following the regulations that we all need to follow to get over this pandemic. So let's get started, Malcolm. First, we're gonna talk a little bit about your background, and then we're gonna go into some critical areas that the news agency feels are important. One has to do with jobs and job opportunities, and one has to do with personal safety in the area of Hemet, and finally we're going to take a look at sort of a unique proposition that you've made about ways of pulling the community together in ways that are of your thinking and liking. So we'll get started by just asking you to give us a little background about your professional life and what you feel qualifies you to serve on the city council.
Well, I am an associate marriage and family therapist down here in Palm Street, and it's called New Hope Christian Counseling. I've been there for about 3 years. I've been practicing as a therapist for about 5 years, and I feel that my background it matches with what someone would call a city council member, because what I do with my everyday clients is what I could incorporate as a whole with the entire city. So, for example, if someone comes in to my office with a problem, and they might say, "Hey, these are the symptoms I'm having," and then I give a diagnosis, and the diagnosis is to call them crazy. The diagnosis is so that we can create a treatment plan for them to get better. So then I think that my background as a therapist would go along with being a city council member, because it's not like I'm going to diagnose the entire city. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find out the symptoms that are happening in the city, and then we're going to create some kind of, for lack of better words, a diagnosis, and then create a treatment plan for the entire city, so that at least the city knows what we're treating, why we're treating it, and how to make it better.
Great.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's dive right into one of the key issues that Hemet residents have been concerned about for a long time, which is jobs and getting new businesses in the area. Do you have some thoughts in that area that you'd like to pursue as a city council person?
Well, when it comes to jobs, it seems like it is very needed in this valley. There are a lot of people out here. I think the biggest thing to focus on is the barriers to the jobs. So it's what's stopping particular people in Hemet from getting these jobs that are here, and then what's stopping the city itself from getting more jobs to come into the city of Hemet. And so what it looks like is you have a lot of people here who do not necessarily either qualify for some of these jobs that could come based on their backgrounds, and if they have felonies, if they're on parole or probation. So there's those barriers, and then once we look at the barriers to people getting jobs, then we can look at how do we get more jobs to come in, because if we get jobs to come in and everybody here has some kind of barrier to it, then what's the purpose of getting the new jobs here? So it's like we have to somehow get a consensus of all the people who live here and reside in the city of Hemet, and get a little bit of like understanding of where their backgrounds is, how we can help them, so that we can get the right jobs to come here and partner with the right. Because if we just ask any corporation to come here, they're going to want to benefit from that. And if we have people here who have the background and the wherewithal to work in some of these entry level and some of these manufacturing jobs that we could potentially bring to Hemet, then I feel like we could match potential corporations with the people, the citizens who are already here. And I think that's a big step to bringing jobs here, to even making sure that the jobs that we already have here are filled. You know, some people don't want to work, so we have to find out what's the barrier or what's their motivation for not wanting to work. Is it just wanting to, you know, be with someone who is, you know, on getting like county money, and you know they don't want to necessarily be motivated for their own selves to make their own way? Or is it because their background? Every time I go out for a job, they look at my background, I don't qualify, or they don't accept people who with a particular background. What are these barriers? Can we find out what these barriers are, and can we make it such a way that we can eliminate these barriers?
Great, okay, and so what I heard you say there, Malcolm, was that some of your background as an associate family therapist brings a kind of unique perspective to these community problems. Maybe we can hear a little bit more about that as we look at the other problems. And this focus on barriers is something new I haven't heard anybody say yet. So I think that's something interesting for people to think about, is that somebody with your kind of background looking at barriers to people making their life work might be better qualified to look at the community barriers.
Yeah, someone mentioned to me that they were on my face page, and they questioned, because I was talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they said, we don't really know what that means, and it's basically one particular barrier that doesn't allow a person to make their way, or at least orient themselves to some kind of positive measure in their life, is, do they feel safe? What that is do they have access to water? Do they have access to food? Do they have access to the basic needs, shelter, warmth, those things? If a person doesn't feel safe, then they can't move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs in that triangle. So it's like, once we meet a person's basic needs, do they feel safe? Then we can talk about, you know, community, connection, love, and things like that. But if somebody's living in survival, I mean, you have to imagine, if somebody's been living in survival for so long, how do we expect them to be able to orient themselves in like a mature way or something like that, someone would say. So recently I was talking to an individual that it was like based on their background, they have this high IQ, you could say, for, I can tell if you're lying. I can tell if you're a con man. I can tell like something about you. But then when it comes to emotional intelligence, they lack in that, you know? So the inability to build connections and bonds with people, that's lacking. And that's one of the things that you'll see in people whose the bottom level basic needs haven't been met, because they're just trying to survive out here, and there's no more living when you're just trying to survive. Does that make sense? So that's a barrier.
So we could be talking about homeless people or people on the verge of homelessness that can't make the next month's rent, or the next month's they're going to lose their car and be out on the street.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. So if you're, it's like stepping off the sidewalk. A bus comes, you jump out of the way of that bus, only to find yourself jumping into the path of another bus, and you never get to relax. And then you have these people that are around you like, hey, get yourself together, but you can't even relax to even like sit back and like, what do I really need to do with my life? How can I make this all happen? Because you're just so reactive, And then because you're in this reactive kind of mode, when anybody comes to advice or anything like that, it doesn't make any sense to the person that you're giving the advice to. So I talked to some of these kids here in Hemet, and they're making like $2,000 selling meth, right? And it's like, I say, hey, why don't you go get a job instead of selling? You don't have to look over your shoulder. That doesn't make any sense to them, because they don't feel safe. They don't feel, if they stop making this money, there's nothing, because they're just worried about today. And that's what survival is. I'm just worried about today. I'm not thinking about if I get caught tomorrow, or if I, run into, make contact with law enforcement in any kind of way. I'm just trying to survive today. My little brothers and sisters aren't eating, so I'm out here selling this meth. Or if I'm a 13-year-old young woman out here in Hemet, I'm gonna prostitute myself so I can feed my younger brothers and siblings, because my parents are strung out over here. And some of these things we're not really looking at. We're just complaining about these people running around stealing and things, and not really looking at like the root of the problem. And it's just more about, it's war on drugs, it's war on crime. But we're talking about people who are just surviving. If we can get to these barriers of how these people are living, that would be able to bring the community together, because then people can at least relax.
I asked somebody the other day how many homeless people they thought were in Hemet, and they said somewhere between maybe 70 and 100 in Hemet. So you got that many people that are at that first level, survival level. And it's pretty noticeable to a lot of the citizens.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're right, a lot of people want to just take a harsh, get rid of them approach, and not really going to ever understand what the person's going through. Let's transition into another concern of the community here, which is public safety. You're walking down, you're walking out of Denny's down on Florida, and it's 10 o'clock at night, and you see a bunch of people on little 20-inch bikes, and they don't look like you, and all of a sudden you get nervous, and you're going to have to walk into the parking lot, and public safety becomes a big issue, along with this earlier discussion. Maybe we don't understand those people that are in that situation.
Yeah.
Do you have some thoughts about public safety, what we can do to improve it for the whole community, not just come down hard on these people that are on Maslow's level 1 to make it easier for the rest of the folks?
Well, the reality of that is we're not going to be able to save everyone or help everyone. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing I had to contend with when I first started my career in psychology, because I wanted to help everyone, and I wanted to get everyone off the streets, and I wanted to help all the couples love each other, and you know what I mean? And help with couples that have, these troubled teens and kids with, parenting practices, healthy parenting practices. But when it comes to public safety, it's, unfortunately, we'll have to create standardized ordinances that mimic surrounding cities. That makes it harder to be on the streets like that. Why? Because what we want to do is we want to funnel those individuals to specific areas like these nonprofits and these churches, so that it's almost like you're almost forcing the hand for them to get help. Because sometimes people who are on Maslow's hierarchy of needs don't necessarily know that they need help, and not necessarily want help. So if we have standardized ordinances throughout the city and surrounding cities, then what that does is it makes it harder for people to be out on the streets, because they'll be cited and things like that. Mm-hmm. If we create a place for them to go to at least stay the night, they can do whatever during the day, but at least during the night you have this place where you can stay at, because some of these businesses out here have to pick up needles in the morning, and they have to pick up feces after some of these people who are not respecting some of these businesses. And so if they're not going to respect the area, then the ordinances need to be tighter and they need to be upheld. If that looks like more security and more police officers, then that's what has to happen in order to enforce some of these laws or ordinances. But at the same time, we can't make it hard on people and then not give them, something to go to. So it's like, we can't say, oh, let's make stronger laws and let's make stronger this, when we don't give the person like an out, or, it's something like you tell your child, stop doing something, but then you don't give them an alternative. So then they find something else maladaptive to get into. Instead of you redirecting their behavior or their energy into something else that's more healthier. And so that's the whole idea with working with the security of Hemet and the police department of Hemet to enforce some of these ordinances a little. And then it's the biggest thing I think too that would help is more lighting. If there was more lighting around, then there would be less places to hide. And if there's less places to hide, then these people won't be out like how they are. And then because there's more lighting, people will feel safer if somebody is sleeping on the corner because it's well lit. So more lighting, I think, is the first foremost, right? And then making sure that the ordinances are held with the same standards of surrounding cities. That's important. But then also making sure that these people have somewhere to go, because we can't make stronger laws and then they don't have nowhere to go. That doesn't make any sense.
What about sending police out to non-violent domestic violence altercations and arresting the mentally ill for doing what mentally ill people do? Do you have some thoughts on that?
I believe that if the police department can partner with, the Department of Social Services, that instead of the police officers going out, I want to make this distinction clear that I don't suggest social workers go out. I suggest that a team that could help alleviate the police's job of going to these domestic calls. That way the police could work on being more proactive in the city and going to things that are more, because that crime is within the four walls. That, the domestic violence, the domestic dispute, that's within the four walls. But there's a lot of other things around Hemet that the police department could be getting involved, and they probably want to, but there's so many domestic violence calls, and there's these things that kind of divert their attention, so now the police department's reactive. So if we can divert some of the attention off of the police department, they could do it in such a way where there's a team that works for it. So this would be good for the Department of Social Services, because now they have a team that works that has the authority to kind of go into some of